So what's going on, guys? Welcome to the Adobe After Effects course. Welcome to the section 1, the introduction to the basics section. This is gonna be the introduction of the software itself. Overall, the introduction to the layout, because before we can crack onto any of the juicy stuff, we've got to understand how to maneuver between the program, because at the end of the day, if you don't know what you're doing, it could be a real hard program to navigate. So that's what this episode here is gonna be. So first off, this right here is what the program is going to look like once you actually load it up and start a new project. And basically, you've got a few different sections. As you see, if we click a different sections, it will highlight this sort of blue outline around it, which means that we're currently operating in that particular section. So we'll start off chronologically. So first off, up here what you have is all the different actual standard buttons that you will have in an actual program. These menus here are pretty universal more or less in any program you go into, and we'll get into the different specifications of each other of the options that they give you here. You got a file which is more or less dealing with the actual project itself. Edit, which is some actual internal stuff, whether it be copy pasting and duplicating stuff like that. Ideally, we'll be doing with shortcuts in the future because it's just a much quicker way to do it, and we'll be getting to that in the tools and shortcuts section. Composition, which we'll crack on later. Layer, which is all revolving around the actual different layers we have created down here in the timeline. Effects is pretty universal. This right here is overall, it's pretty straightforward. It's because the effects, of course, you can also access that right here on effects and presets. Animation is a whole bunch of different animation based stuff. View revolves around the layout. Window is again taking on different tabs, so there's actually way more tabs than just the ones we have here, but these are the standard ones. And help, which is more or less not necessary because I am here to help you walk stuff through basically. So that is the actual buttons you have at the top, and then we'll crack on with the actual layout itself. So over here is the project manager, aka the media manager. When we import stuff, it's gonna be here. When we make compositions, it's gonna be here too. And we get a graphic and bring it in, it's gonna be here. If we make any sort of different pieces of media, that's all going to appear right here. And of course, it's empty because we currently have no media. You've got a name, which is the name of the media, whatever the case may be. If you import a file, for example, that's the file number 1, it'll pop up right here on under the name. Over here is the composition. Once we have actually clicked a new composition, which we're gonna be getting through next, and we have actually built a composition. This is your preview window. Anything that we do to the actual project itself, edit, so whatever will be able to be played back up here. Then we have over here, which is a few different option tabs. So we've got info. This will give us basic information on our clip once we've got it loaded up down here in the timeline. And audio, which will obviously allow us to tweak different levels. However, that also can be accessed down here in the actual timeline itself. Preview, which can be kind of accessed through just the use of the spacebar, which is playing stuff or stopping stuff or skipping frame by frame, which again can be accessed through shortcuts, which we're gonna extensively get into it in the sections coming up. And then we have this effects and preset tab with a couple of the tabs right here. For example, libraries, which is a very variety of different assets and stuff like that. Again, all of this stuff is gonna be deep dive. Now, down here is the actual timeline. Any actual layers we create, for example, importing clips, etc., they will all pop up with their names right here. So as you see, source name here, they will be where our clips start appearing, or shapes start appearing, or our graphics or songs, whatever the case might be. So if we imported that clip, for example the clip number 1, and we drag and drop it into our timeline right here on the source name, it will appear here as a line and it will say a clip number 1, and that's the layer organization section which is linked to the timeline. This right here, this whole area here, the sort of light gray area, is the timeline where all our chops or cuts, our effects or etc. And this right here is gonna be sort of the main area where you're actually able to influence stuff, next to perhaps using the effects tab, which is working in unison with the actual timeline area. And also at any point of time, if you decide rather there is sort of a higher priority on each one of these tabs, as you notice that the cursor right here, if we hover over these sort of dark lines that sort of separate everything, we get this different kind of cursor. The reason for that is because we are actually able to drag out areas or tabs that we want. So for example, let's say that we're editing a huge project and the layers are building up, and when we stop being able to see them, we are actually even easily able to drag this up, for example, and actually at any point adjust the different tabs that we have available to us here. And we could even go a step further if you are not happy with the layout, which personally I always leave the layout how it is based on the simple layout. However, at any single time we're actually able to go up here and actually drag and drop sections and link them to different places where we think that they might be a little bit more easily accessible. For example, let's say for some reason we wanted the timeline maybe up here. As you can see, once I click the name of the actual section, we could drag it up here and drag and drop it. However, in my opinion, this isn't optimal at all, and at any point if you accidentally do that, because it happens to the rest of us, you can go up to Window, Workspace, and then go to reset to standard layout, and just like that it will reset at any time. So by all means, if you're new to the program, sometimes you might be dragging something in a hurry and you might accidentally drag it down here, and then you're freaking out that you think you messed up. Don't worry, a Window, Workspace, and reset to standard layout might save you. And just like that, guys, so that's the layout walkthrough. See you in the upcoming part. And the Hey, what is up? Welcome back to the Adobe After Effects course. Continuing on the basic section, we're gonna be doing starting a new composition in After Effects. There's something that I'm going to address now, which is that there's always more than one way to do something in After Effects. So for example, we're going to break down how to make a new composition, but there's could be a variety of different ways that we can actually do it. So it is number one, arguably the simplest. It's right in front of us, new composition. All we have to do is actually click it and we're able to create a new composition. Now for the sake of just making the numbers go up, we're just gonna call this comp1, because obviously throughout this After Effects course we will be creating so many compositions, but I think it's a good way to organize it by just calling them comp1 to comp2, comp3, or whatever the case might be. And right below here we have an actual different specification. So for example, right now it kind of by default creates a 920 by 1080p sequence, and there's just a standard 1080p sequence, right? But for example, let's say we wanted to make a square sequence, maybe we would do 1080 by 1080, and that would be able to create a square composition. But for the purpose of this course, we're just gonna go with 920 by 1080. And this right here is an actual width and dimensions. Now down here is the frame rate. So at the moment it's 23.976, but maybe for example standard footage might be, you know, like 30 frames a second, or oftentimes it's usually 29.97, which is close to a 30 frames a second. So we'll just leave it on 29.97, and that of course can be adjusted depending on the clips that you're working with. Some clips might be a 60 frames a second. If you're working with an extreme slow motion, you might even be using a 120 frames per second, but standard footage is usually about 30 frames per second or just 29.97 frames per second. Okay, so down here is actually going to be the duration. This is the next most important situation you should be dealing with. Now the numbers look maybe a little confusing to you. If you're looking at a first glance, you could think maybe this is a 30 minutes and 18 seconds, but it's actually not. It's actually a 30 seconds and 18 milliseconds. The way this goes right here is the farthest number is hours. So this is the hour. Next over is the minutes, and next over is the seconds, and finally is the milliseconds. So for example, let's say we wanted to make a 1 hour and 30 minute sequence. We will change the 0 over here to a 1, next over here to 30, and we will actually make this right here 0, 0, and 0, and 0. And that right there will be a 1 hour and 30 minute sequence that you're gonna work with. But of course, that's pretty huge and we don't really want that. So let's go ahead and change the 1 hour to 0. Next, change the 30 minutes to 0 again. And let's just make a 30-second sequence. That's what we're gonna be doing for the purpose of the example today. Now is background color. Background color is the next sort of key thing you should be able to look at. And that right there at default is set to black. Depending on what your actual project specifications are, you might want to change that maybe to a different color, but for the majority of your project, black is just a nice base layer background color based on the fact that the background color isn't actually being shown to the audience of the video most of the time, because of the simple fact that we are overlaying the footage over the top of it. So overall, black is a pretty useful color to have as the background color. And we're gonna go ahead and press OK. And just like that, in our composition, our preview, we actually have the composition pop up. And in our media manager over here, comp 1 appears right there, and just like that, we have created our first composition. Now also there's a third way to do it. So after we could create which does the exact same thing, we are actually able to create our composition right here. And of course at any time we also have the toggle transparency grid. So if we were to click that, it turns the background off. So this is perfect if you're trying to create overlays, if you're sort of like trying to create lower thirds and you just want to create something that can be input on another scene without a background. This is perfect. And we're going to be emphasis and extensively getting to that later on. So we'll toggle that back on because the majority of the projects do not have the transparency grid on, because we do want a background to it. Now let's go ahead and delete this and show you the third and final way to make composition, and this is by going down here to create a new composition button, which is down here, and we can actually click that, and again we are greeted with the exact same familiar composition settings window that we are able to access in two other different ways before that. And this will of course be the final way we'll do it. So we'll actually look at our sequence here. This is pretty good and let's just go with it. And just like that, we have explored 3 different ways to create a composition, starting with there's never one way to do something in After Effects. There's always at least 2, 3, 4 or even 5 different ways to do the exact same thing in After Effects. And you know, although they're different, they still breed the exact same result. So that right there was the starting a new composition section. We're going to come back in a second with importing a new clip into different ways. Continuing on, there's always multiple ways to do something in After Effects. See you there.